Hi.
It's your turn to go on camera here.
My favorite.
um, all right, so we have this place all to yourself. This is you in the white padded room where you and I maybe belong. Well, one of the things that came up along the way here was the fact that people maybe don't know your origin story. We touched on that briefly in I think episode titled "Red Gate," but
Yeah.
it was more of just a one-off.
Yeah, I just told
Um,
a random story.
yeah. So this is your chance to kind of like unwind,
Mm-hmm.
kick back in this probably haunted environment. I should mention that the tripod is sitting on a pentagram right now. So if anything happens, um, let us know in the comments. But without sounding cheesy, just tell people a little bit about anything you think they should know about your origin story.
So I'll say I grew up in Astoria, Oregon, and it's a very like old historical town with a lot of old housing. And I moved around a lot as a kid with my mom, but we'd usually move kind of in between moves. We'd be back with my grandparents who were more stationary. And their house, my grandparents' house, was, I wouldn't say that it was just like full out haunted, but I had some of my first experiences there. And then when we lived in other places moving around, it would often be older buildings or housing that me and my siblings would have experiences, like doors opening on their own. You'd hear like stuff clanking in the kitchen when there was nobody in there, seeing shadows out of the corner of your eye. Um, kind of like that typical stuff. But I was terrified of any activity that happened to me as a kid, and I didn't like to sleep alone, and I didn't like to sleep in a room without some sort of nightlight on, even when like if I was sleeping with my mom or something. So it wasn't until I got older that I became more curious about the stuff than fearful. The stuff that I remember the most, or that like impacted me the most, was when my grandparents bought a 5-acre property out in a little area called Svinson, which is like just outside of Astoria. It's still the same zip code, but off Highway 30. And it was a 5-acre property, like corner lot that the road would wrap around. And we had deer and elk out there all the time, grazing and bedding down. And we were very familiar with what they sound like, having hooves, and plus I was a horse person, but they would jump over the drainage ditch between the road and where our field started. I knew what that sounded like, and it's important to note for the story. But one night, I think I was about 9 years old in the summertime, I had a friend come over and spend the night, and it was really hot. We probably went to bed around like midnight or something around there, and I definitely wasn't able to sleep for like an hour and a half or so, just because it was hot. And then she was snoring. My friend fell asleep like instantly. So I decided to sleep down on the carpet below the window to just like get some kind of a breeze. The window was open, but the blinds were mostly drawn. And there's this one area of the field where it was kind of diagonal if you were looking out the back deck of the house, like the diagonal corner from the house, where the deer would like always come in. And I was laying on the floor and I almost fell asleep, and I just hear like a singular thud followed by running footsteps. And usually you hear two thuds, like when the elk would enter the property, you'd hear, the thud thud, front legs followed by the back legs. But this was a singular thud followed by, it just sounded like somebody was booking it through our field. And it was coming towards the house and moving very quickly because it covered, the space of that field before you hit like the pond and the house. it seemed like in a matter of no time. And when it got closer to the house, I could start to hear really heavy breathing. And I was frozen still because I knew my window was open. And for some reason, I thought that this thing would notice that my window was open and know that I was there and I'd be in danger or something. Because I knew it wasn't like an animal. But it banked around the corner of the house and past my window, and it was so loud. Like I could hear it so quiet out there besides this thing running by, that it felt almost like I was outside with it. But it ran past my window. It took one single step on the gravel driveway and then it hit the pavement. And when it hit the pavement, it sounded like bare feet slapping on the pavement, and it sounded very bipedal. And it continued on the pavement just long enough to pass like this barbed wired fence and line of old cedar trees that divided our property and our neighbor's property. And then there was like a short pause in the running. And that pause was this thing jumping over the drainage ditch into their field. And they had like 3 foot tall grass over there. And I just started hearing it run again. And it was running through the sound of, tall grass. And I slowly listened to it fade out. But I was already afraid of being out there on that property at night, like feeling watched because we had a lot of windows. And to hear that just confirmed my fear of feeling like there was something out there. And it just moved too quickly. It sounded too heavy to be a human, but it also didn't sound like any animal. And then flash forward, I think I was closer to like 13 or 14. My mom and I had come home from shopping, I think in Longview or something like that, and nobody else was home. And the dogs had been in the house by themselves for like at least 4 hours. So we knew they probably had to go to the bathroom. So we go out the back deck that faces the field and the pond. And usually they just go booking it out there down onto the grass and do their business. But for whatever reason, they weren't wanting to go out there. And so my mom and I walked down off the deck and down into the grass area, hoping they'd follow us to, do their business. And we were kind of distracted talking to each other at this point. And as we're talking, we hear something moving through like thick blackberry bush. And once it comes out of that, we heard it hit the grass, and you just hear like boom, boom, boom. And it was really loud footsteps approaching us. And I think my mom asked me, like, is that an elk? And I shook my head. I was like, I don't think so. It doesn't sound like hooves, and it sounds like 2 feet. And same thing, it was accompanied by that really heavy breathing, which reminded me of the night that I heard that thing running through the yard. And we listened for a minute, and it didn't break its rhythm. Like it was beelining towards us. And so we kind of went from being like curious, trying to figure out what it was, to both of us looking more concerned. And my mom just goes like, where are the dogs? And we look up, and they never left the deck. They were at the door with like their tails tucked and freaked out, wanting inside. They never came out. And so she just goes, get in the house. And we ran back up the deck through the back door, and she immediately locked the door, and then she shut the blinds on the window that would have been facing where this thing was walking. And I remember thinking to myself, like, why would you close the blinds if it's just an animal? You know what I mean? It seemed kind of weird. So I remember that kind of sat with me, but it was odd behavior for the dogs because they were used to seeing elk and deer, and it didn't matter what size it was, day or night. If there was an animal or a person on our property, they would just, go running and barking after whatever it was. So it was odd behavior for them to like cower and refuse to come off the deck. Towards the end of middle school, we moved into town, and we moved into this apartment complex just below the community college. And my best friend was spending the night with me one night, and we had both fallen asleep on one side of the couch, on either side. And I'm looking out the window of the apartment, which there's, sliding glass doors and like bay windows that have a small view of the Columbia River. And you can mostly see like the tops of the downtown buildings, and then you'll be able to see the ships going by, but you can't see the water. And one night, she had fallen asleep and I was still awake, and I was looking out the window, and I just see this thing floating above the buildings or the water. I wasn't sure like how far it was, but it was gray and I couldn't quite make out a shape of it, but it was just floating kind of at this speed down, well, I'd say like west down the river, kind of towards the ocean. And I wake her up and she sees it too. And we're kind of like, is this a weather balloon or like a piece of like giant plastic floating in the air? What's going on? And eventually it gets out of sight from the window. So we decide to like run out the front door of the house to look out the other side and see if we can see it coming from around the other side of the building. And we do. We see it kind of coming out from, the other side, and it starts to move up the hill diagonally towards us. And at that point, we go wake up my mom because we still can't figure out what it is, but we're starting to think that it's something weirder. So my mom comes out with us. She was kind of irritated, but so all three of us observed this gray thing that had no source of light and it had no sound. But as it got closer, and it came like right to us where we were standing, and then it stopped and it hovered. And I could make out like the shape of a bell. That's what it looked like to me. And I remember asking my mom what she saw, and she was like, I don't know, my glasses or contacts in, so like I can't really tell. And then I think my friend thought that she was like, I almost see triangular shape, but it almost looks like it's kind of changing shape. But for me, it looked very clear as day, like a bell shape. And this thing just hovered and sat there forever. It felt like it was probably just 5 minutes, but it felt like a really long time. And I think, I've pointed out to you the distance that it was. It was probably, it was a little higher than like the height of a telephone pole, I'd say, like just above that. But it was maybe about 30, 40 feet away at one point at that height, and about the size of like a small Mini Cooper or smart car. Just like this little compact thing, but good size. And I remember thinking like, this thing is observing us as we're observing it. And I wasn't afraid of it. I was definitely more curious than afraid. And so I actually went up the second, to the second level of the apartment complex, up the staircase to a little platform with the railing. And I climbed up that. But weirdly, I kind of like stayed low because it felt like standing up was a little too exposed maybe. But I wanted to get closer to it. So like at one point I leaned over the rail, and, it wasn't that close, but it felt like I could almost reach out and touch it. But my mom didn't want me doing that. Like if I could have gotten higher and a better viewpoint of it or gotten closer, I think I would have. And then I think at the point that I was trying to get closer to it is when it started to move again. And it pretty much went from its stationary position and started to move up and away from us diagonally. And still no sound, no light, but the amount of time it took for it to disappear was like no time at all. It was just like seconds. And it went from being the size of a tiny little compact car to being this little tiny, like ant-sized blip in the sky. Like it just weirdly, and I don't know if it itself was shrinking or if it like moved very quickly to a distance. And yeah, I don't know what it was to this day, but to me, it sounds like I was a UFO. It looked like a UFO. I mean, it was an unidentified flying object. So I don't know. And that same friend, we used to sit on her roof a lot when we were teenagers. And she lived out in the country. There was no street lights. It was just cow fields around us and really good stargazing. And one night we were sitting up there and I see, it was probably around like 2 a.m. or something, but I see this star come just zipping across the sky at a much higher speed than you see satellites. And it's way out there. And it comes up to another star and stops. And they flash at each other. And then the one that flew over starts to circle this one. And as it's circling it, the one in the middle is just pulsing. And then it just goes out and is gone, completely disappears. And this one comes to a halt and shoots off at a diagonal angle really fast. And we both saw it and we immediately ran inside, even though it was, you know, really far away. It was just obvious that that wasn't any kind of satellite or anything like that. It freaked us out. So that was like my UFO experiences as a kid. I think it was my sophomore year in high school. I was at a friend's house who was living with her grandmother at the time. And this is a story that sits with me because it was very creepy in the moment. So it was like a long house with 2 levels, very like long ranch style house, but it did have a lower level. And our friend had her bedroom downstairs because they were doing some construction or remodeling upstairs. And her grandma was gone a lot because she showed poodles. So she was constantly at like dog breed shows. And these hallways were so long, it was almost like felt like a hotel hall. And the downstairs bathroom was getting remodeled, so we had to come upstairs to the little half bath to, go to the bathroom. And me and my friend were like, oh, okay, we're gonna go to the bathroom, we'll be right back. And we go upstairs and we go down this long hallway. And I wait outside because it's such a small little bathroom that you can't really fit 2 people. So I'm sitting in the dark with my back against the wall, and I decided to just like sit on the floor kind of with my legs up, and and I'm just sitting there. And all I can see is to the left of me the light coming through the doorway underneath the door. And I closed my eyes for a second and reopened them, and I'm sitting in pitch black. And so I kind of like feel for the door. I'm still sitting at the door. And I like kind of patted the door down, trying to like get my friend's attention, and I didn't get a response. And all of a sudden I look up down the hallway and there's a light underneath the door, but it's at the opposite far end of the hallway on the opposite side. And I just start thinking like, how the heck did I get over here? That doesn't make any sense. Like I just sat down and was sitting here for a few seconds. So I get up and I walk down towards the light, and it's the only way I can like see where I'm going without running into the walls. And I reach for the door handle and I'm kind of knocking, and I open the door. And as soon as I open the door, the light just goes out and it's pitch black. And I open the door to this room that I can like barely see the silhouettes of like furniture. And I instantly just knew that I was being tricked, and got like a really icky feeling. So I shut the door and I look back down the hallway where I came from, and the light had been there the whole time. And so then I just book it down the hall and I like, you know, knock on the door and tell my friend to open up, and she opens the door. I'm freaking out and she's laughing at me. And I was like, did you turn off the light in here? Or, you know, did you do something? And she was like, no, what are you talking about? Like, you're acting crazy right now. And the friend that lived in that house always told us that it was haunted. She spent a lot of time there by herself, and I really didn't pay any mind to it. Like, I never really asked her. I think she would just hear things and sense a presence. But yeah, that one freaked me out. I kind of categorize this into weird stories because it's not something that I've experienced since then. But my friend that I saw the UFO with, this happened in a similar time frame, like within a year of that same ghost story. But at her house, I think it was still freshman year or sophomore year, there was a huge storm that came through, and like hurricane level winds happened in Astoria, and it took out the whole town. People were, you know, stuck in their houses without power, all that stuff. And she lived out towards Lewis and Clark, which is kind of similar to Swenson, but it's like an opposite direction. And we're staying at her house, and her oldest brother and her second oldest brother, the three of us were sitting in the living room with her brothers on one couch and I was on another. And then my friend, I think, was trying to take a shower or something. But we were sitting there talking just about, I don't know, life or what had just gone down, like the storm and all that. And I remember, I don't remember drifting off to sleep, but apparently me and her second oldest brother fell asleep at the same time, and her older brother was still awake. And I just remember seeing images of a house they used to live in when we were like little. We knew each other since we were like 3 years old. And there was this tree, really big tree, we would always play under in their yard. And when we drove past their old house to get to where they lived at that time then, you could see that tree came down in the storm. And so I'm like seeing images without realizing that I'm not awake still, and flash images of this tree, and we're like acknowledging that it came down in the storm. And I was like, yeah, that's really sad. And so many good memories or something like that. And then her younger brother goes, yeah, it's super sad, like responds in some way. And then I just hear her older brother go, what the hell are you guys talking about? And I wake up and I look over and I see her younger brother kind of sit up out of, you know, kind of a sleeping position. And her older brother's like, what are you guys talking about? What the heck? And we just both immediately go, the tree at the old house. And he's like, yeah, like that's what we were talking about. And her older brother's like, you guys were both asleep. Like, we weren't having a conversation. And we were adamant that like it was happening. And her oldest brother was just like, no, like whatever just happened was completely in your guys' minds. You guys were both asleep. So that was pretty weird. I don't know what you make of that, but just things continued to happen that just kept me having an open mind towards the possibilities of, you know, just about anything. I think those are my weirdest stories of like the teenage years. And then after high school, I was working downtown and I had made some friends through my job. And so we decided to go camping up at Spruce Run, which is off Highway 26. And so there's a campground that kind of takes you down below closer to the river. And then up above is this lake called Lost Lake that you can take a road up to. And we decided that we were going to camp there. It was me, my friend, her boyfriend, and then their dog. We get there, I don't know, earlier in the day and decide we're going to like grab our campsite first and set stuff up. But we noticed that there's like this trail at the beginning of the campground, and it looks like it would parallel the road that leads up to the lake. So maybe you could hike up there instead of drive. So we set up camp, and while we're doing that, I remember her boyfriend commenting on how heavy their cooler was. Like they had just over prepared by bringing lots of food. And then I think we worked at a beer growler station at the time. So we had like huge glass growlers that they had filled with beer. So it was like 40 pounds, it was a heavy cooler. It's important to note for later that night. But so we set up camp, and then we go attempt to walk that hike. And so we set out, and I remember thinking, I don't think people are taking this trail very much, because I kept running into cobwebs like every 10 to 15 feet. And not that they can't make new cobwebs quickly, but it just had been kind of overgrown and it didn't seem very kept. And pretty soon we start hitting some switchbacks. So we start, going up the switchbacks, and the whole time the dog is running up ahead of us, like to the next switchback, and then it'll run back down and, all excited and happy to be on a hike but check in with us. So it was like we'd be here and the dog runs up a whole other one and comes back down to check in. And we get probably like 3 switchbacks in, and we all hear something hitting the trees up over our heads. And we look up, and there's a rock about this size flying arched up over our heads and then going kind of downhill back towards the bottom of the trail. And I look up, and there's so much foliage that I can't see at this point where it came from. But the dog was kind of like a little bit on edge and stopped going ahead of us. He ended up staying closer. And we thought it was weird, but we were like, well, maybe there's kids up there or something, doing something silly. I think I remember making a joke like, maybe it's Bigfoot, but, not fully, I don't know, convinced that that's what it was. And so I was like, we've got to be close, it can't be that hard of a hike far. So we kept going one more. And so we get to the next switchback, probably about halfway through it, and another rock comes up and over our heads. And it's hitting like perfectly almost every tree it can as it goes down, like a lot of noise. And when I saw the rock start to arch over our heads, I instantly like looked up to see if I could figure out where it came from. And sure enough, I saw like this one big shrubbery bush just like shaking. And but you couldn't see anything in it. But it was a really thick brushed area. So we were like thinking maybe it's maybe a person's living up there. Who knows? Or we just decided we're like, okay, let's turn around. Because at that point, they were getting kind of weirded out, and the dog started descending the trail without us. The dog was just like, no, I'm out. Like he wasn't about it. So we went back down to camp. We drove up to the lake, and then we came back down and had some dinner, had a couple beers around the fire. And then we went to bed that night, and I was woken up in the middle of the night by something moving the cooler, like dragging it across the gravel. in like weird spurts. It would like drag it for a second and then pause, drag it for a second and then pause. And my rain fly was open. Like I could have leaned up to see what it was, but I was creeped out because I figured if it was an animal, I would have heard like movement, approaching or walking around. You think something, if it was trying to get into the cooler for food, it'd be like scratching at it or sniffing, anything like that. And whatever it was strong enough to like drag a 40-pound cooler across the gravel. So it wasn't a raccoon or, a small rodent. But so those three things happen, and we wake up the next morning and we go and we hike this train track trail along the river. And we're like maybe 30, 40 minutes into the hike, and on like one of the old railroad ties in the center is something just like laying there. And I spotted it, so I walk up to investigate what it is. And it is the internal organs all attached of something small. Like I think the size of the entirety of it was probably about that big, but it had like a teeny tiny little stomach and a little, like, I think even the brain was attached somehow, or like separate on the side, but all the like main internal stuff was attached. And it looked like it was licked clean or like washed, and there was no bugs on it. It looked really fresh. And it looked like something just set it there recently. So, I mean, I don't know if that was anything worth noting as far as like Bigfoot, but it almost seemed like somebody left it out there as like a gift. And I had heard that about, them gifting weird things like that. So that was an interesting camping trip. We should probably go back there and try to camp and investigate sometime. So in like my mid-20s, I think I tried moving to Portland and was there for about a year, didn't care for it, and came back to Astoria. I lived in a couple of different places, renting rooms and whatnot. But over the course of like 5 or 4 years, I had this phenomena seemingly follow me around of smoke detectors going off, always being in during like the witching hour times, and it wouldn't be in the same place. It would happen to me when I was house sitting, like slash cat sitting for my boss. It happened twice at their house, which was brand new, and they had never had anything like that happen to them. And I remember it happening at like 4 different locations and weirding me out, because I know it's possible for a smoke detector to like stop alerting if, the smoke goes away or whatever. But what would happen is it would wake me out of, like a dead sleep at between 2:30 and 3:30 in the morning. And it would always be the smoke detector, regardless where it was, different houses, apartments, whatever, right outside the bedroom door in the hallway. It would always be the hallway smoke detector. And which, I don't know, I'm sure that's usually where most of them are, but it would be the one closest to the room I was in. And as soon as you open the door to look and make sure there's no smoke or fire or whatever, it would just self-shut off. I had a friend who owned a retail shop downtown. I remember going in there and talking to her about it and being like, this keeps happening and it's really weird. And have you ever heard of something like this happening to other people? And she was just like, I don't know. I've never heard of that, but it's kind of creeping me out. Can we change the subject? And like she wasn't really having it. And as soon as I was going to be like, yeah, sorry, like let's talk about something else. As soon as she asked that question and I started to respond, her security alarm in her store goes off and it's super loud. And she just looks at me with like this, what the hell did you bring in here? And she goes to, turn it off and check it out. And she's like, all it's saying is that it had a issue with the Wi-Fi connection. And she's like, I've had that happen many times in here where the Wi-Fi drops, and like that's never happened before. That's the first time. And I've creeped her out a little bit. And it continued to happen at like a couple other places after that. And I don't really know what it would be, why it would be happening or like what it was attached to. Like I have some theories, but looking back on it now, I kind of wonder if it was like a literal like alert warning sign for perhaps like the person I was with at the time, or something of that sort. Was it ghosts? Was it something else? I don't know. But it had been kind of in the past, and hadn't had it happen for at least a couple of years. And I went to go visit my parents out in the Ochicos, they were renting a cabin on their friend's property. And the husband and wife that owned it, they were super into Bigfoot. The husband had seen like weird lights on the hills out in the Ochicos before. And so we were sitting around the campfire one night and got on the topic of like UFO stuff and paranormal things. And I told them that story of like the smoke detector stuff following me wherever I went, seemingly. I remember in that moment, like thinking maybe I shouldn't talk about this because I feel like I'm giving it power or something. And sure enough, that night we went to bed and I was in the guest bedroom about 2:33 in the morning. Their smoke alarms went off in the hallway just outside the bedroom door. And I looked at my mom and I was just like, you've got to be kidding me. And I just instantly felt like creeped out, heebie-jeebies kind of feel that I shouldn't have talked about it because here we are. Luckily, we don't have a smoke detector at home. So I think we're good. But
we gotta die.
Yeah. I'd rather die. So we go out there to investigate. Of course, it wakes up the entire house and they self-shut off. And then the second everybody goes back to bed and, gets ready to fall back asleep, it goes off a second time. And this time it's like a second one on the other side of the house in front of the master bedroom room. And they're almost going off, I swear, in like a melodic rhythm. And so we get up again and the husband's like trying to turn them off and they self shut off like they always do. And I can't remember if it happened one more time, but I was just like sitting there like, you've got to be kidding me. And kind of felt like, okay, I'm never going to bring this one up again. But I'm actually just curious if any other people have had the smoke detectors involved in weird phenomena that they've experienced, or as a part of like hauntings or abduction stuff, things like that, because I tend to think there's a little bit of crossover in extraterrestrials being able to present as like maybe by doing things like poltergeist activity or presenting as like orbs or shadow beings. Yeah, I think there's a possibility for that. So I'm not claiming it's one thing or the other. So I did try living in Portland 2 separate times. Wasn't a big fan of the city, but when I lived there, I worked cleaning people's houses for a living. And I definitely cleaned some houses that felt, like they had something going on. There's this one house that didn't feel necessarily haunted. It just felt like time didn't exist there. like to better describe that is I was kind of like the regional manager like position for that cleaning company, and I would train all of the new people. So sometimes I had like 3 or 4 trainees with me and teaching them how to, clean and go through the motions and all the company expectations, stuff like that. And usually when you clean somebody's house, like a couple of times, you get a rhythm down and you get faster at it because you're like, oh, I've been here, I know what I'm doing, like I have a system. And especially when you've had like trainees with you for a couple of times, they get it down. It's not that difficult to really get the hang of. And when there's multiples of you, you should ideally be able to like get in and get out. In this house, it did not matter like how many people I had with me and how good they were at cleaning. You would be stuck there for like 4.5 hours. So I'd always joke about it. But so the first time something strange, there's 2 strange things that happened there. The first time I was there, I had people in training with me, I think 2. I came back the second time by myself, and I was changing the bed sheets in the master bedroom, which is right off of the kitchen and living room area. And the husband was upstairs at the time, the wife was down below, and I think working in our office. And I hear her come up the stairs, and the husband starts talking to her about something, like a random thing that he had heard. He's like, did you know that it can be like dangerous to take a bath during a thunder and lightning storm? And I remember thinking, like, as I'm, changing the pillows out, I was like, why is he bringing this up? I've heard him talk about this already. Like, they've already had this conversation. Why is he bringing it up again? And then I realized, like, I think I was even making the bed when they had this conversation, like right here. And then I'm like, yeah, because her response, and then in my head, I say like a sentence, I can't remember it now, but like a word to word sentence of her response to him to saying that. And right after I thought that sentence in my head, she says word for word what I just said in my head. And I was like, am I having deja vu right now? And then I was just kind of confused. Like, I'm just kind of observing the whole thing. And I thought to myself, like, oh, well, that's really weird. Why would they have this conversation again like this? It can't be deja vu, because in my experience, it's always like a very quick, like just a few seconds. You don't really have time to be present in it or think about it much. It just seems out of your control. That was weird. And I remember on the drive home realizing that was only the second time I had been there. And that was the first time I'd made the bed. So I was like, I wasn't in that position before. And I was with trainees last time, not alone. So that doesn't add up. And I just kind of like brushed it off. So I had been working there for a couple of months. And it was just me coming back. And I went into the master bedroom first, and I start cleaning the bathroom. I'm in the shower, and I have headphones in. I'm listening to music, and I did that pretty typically. But for whatever reason, I was really jumpy. Like, I kept getting like startled by inanimate objects, like a robe hanging on the back of the door made me jump, and other things, which was out of character. I normally don't do that or feel that way. But I just kept feeling like something was going to startle me. Like, I was anticipating being startled. And then sure enough, the husband comes in when I have like my back turned to the door, and he shows up in the doorway and he's like, hey, and it scared the crap out of me. Like, it was like what I thought I was anticipating happened. And he's like, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to startle you. He's like, can I show you something weird? And I was like, yeah. So I followed him back into the living room thinking like maybe I screwed something up that he wanted fixed, or, the trainees did or something. And he's like, look at this. And he points up at the ceiling, and I look up, and there's this clock, and it's just a normal, like super basic looking wall clock, but it's turning. Both hands are just like spinning this speed in, clockwise. And he's like, that's weird, isn't it? I was like, could it be like recalibrating or doing something weird? Like, does it need new batteries? And he's like, no, I've I've had that clock for like 5 years. I've never seen it do that before. He's like, that's weird, isn't it? I was like, yeah, that's pretty weird. And it was random for him to like, he wanted me to witness that. Like he thought it was strange. And so I was like, can I tell you something else weird that has happened? And he's like, yeah, go ahead. And so I tell him, there was a day I came in and cleaned, and you and your wife were talking about the idea that it's dangerous to take baths during a thunder and lightning storm. And he was like, oh, yeah, I remember that day, like, or having that conversation. Well, this sounds crazy, but I was like, did you ever have that conversation with her before? Because like I even knew what her response was word for word, and like it played out in my mind. He's like, no, I had read that on a blog post or article that morning. So he'd never even heard of it before. And so essentially it was kind of like a long drawn out deja vu in a way, like in slow motion. But like I said before, the whole clock thing was weird because I always joked about it, time not existing there in that house for whatever reason. I mean, I almost seemed to know he was gonna like come up behind me on, out of the blue, and like the whole deja vu thing, super weird. Like I knew exactly, like word for word, and how I even like heard it in my mind in her voice and in her tone, how she said it. And that's exactly what she said. It was really weird. My sister started a company down in Eugene when I was still living in Portland, and she invited me to come and work with her. And so I moved down to Eugene, and so did my brother. All of our family was closer together down there. And, but I still kept one client that I cleaned houses or cleaned their house, and did that just for, a little supplemental income. And I remember hanging out with my sister earlier in the week before I go drive to Portland to go clean that house. And we got on the topic of, weird stuff that happens. And I remember complaining to her. I was like, I feel like I haven't seen any weird stuff in the sky since I was a kid, like a teenager. I feel like we used to see weird stuff all the time, or weirder things would happen. And so I was kind of just, I guess, complaining about it, wishing that stuff like that still happened. And a couple days later, I go clean that house, and it was Valentine's Day. And as I'm coming back from Portland, headed south down I-5, I start to reach the area of like the Coburg Hills, and there's a lot of like, farmland and things like that. And just off the shoulder of the road, I think it was close to sunset, because it wasn't dark yet, but it was kind of like the golden hour. And there was two cars that were behind me, but I was in the slow lane, and I see this big flash of light come in, and it immediately just starts zooming forward, but it's like trying to catch its grip of like, flying, and then it stops and it shoots up at a right angle, and then it shoots out at a right angle. And during this movement where it kind of goes up and then straight forward, it was pulsating and became like bigger and brighter. And then it had like kind of a hang of it by then and was stable, and it just shoots straight out super fast and disappears. Like it just goes completely out of sight. And I like threw up my hands, because right after it happens and it disappears, this girl in a, SUV passes me, And she's just got her sunglasses on and she's just like driving. And I'm looking at her like, did you just freaking see that? Like, that was crazy. And she didn't see it. One more car passed me. They didn't look at me. They didn't see anything. They're just like going about their day. And yeah, I called my sister, like forgetting it was Valentine's Day at the time. And I was like, Ashley, I was just complaining I never see weird stuff anymore. I was like, this just happened. And she's like, cool. Like she was like happy for me, but at the same time, it was like I was interrupting her Valentine's moment with her fiance. But so it was interesting that, that happened right after complaining about it and wishing seen more of it. Maybe we should do that more. Just subtly complain like, I really wish I could see a UFO right now. Before I moved to Eugene, I think I'd spent more time coming across like, Bigfoot podcasts or people's encounter stories, YouTube channels talking about Bigfoot, and listening to ones that talked about them in a way that was more, it was a little weirder than just like the physical possibilities of them. And I don't remember who it was I was watching, but they were suggesting or claiming that they had their encounter after attempting to like talk out loud to them. And I had never gone out into the woods with the intention to have Bigfoot activity before because I was just too afraid of doing that on my own. So what I did is I decided to look for a place that looked very wooded on the maps, and I found a road called Wolf Creek Road. And my plan was to sleep in my car overnight somewhere in like dispersed camping, which was pretty bold of me to want to do. And I started driving out that way and realizing I don't have any cell signal out there, nor did I think all I had was like a pocket knife on me and maybe some pepper spray that was probably expired. I kind of came up over to this like peak overlooking where I was gonna be. I still had like 35 minutes left to this destination that I had chosen. And I was like, this seems like a bad idea. So I remembered this road standing out to me when I was coming in. So I turned around and I was like, I'm just gonna go find a pretty nature spot and give up on this idea of this whole thing I was gonna do, try to find, a squatchy spot and spend the night. So I decided to just keep going. And finally I passed like this cement bridge. So I park my car in front of the gate. I get out and I start walking across the bridge. And I get like maybe 6 feet onto the bridge. And I just hear this whack from underneath the bridge. But it sounded metal, like supportive beams getting hit instead of like a wood knock. And at first I was like, oh, maybe there's somebody living under this bridge or, a homeless person, I don't know. So I started to get like a little on alert and I start to walk really quietly across the bridge as I'm like listening, and nothing happens. So I get almost to the other side of the bridge, and it's just an old logging road that keeps going if you follow it. But as I get kind of the same distance from the opposite side of the bridge, I hear it again. And it sounded a little bit different. Instead of like a really, like hollow, dense, or not hollow, like a really dense knock, it sounded almost like the flat part of fingers or something. It sounded like somebody maybe slapped it with a flat surface on their hand. And then I was like, oh, maybe this isn't a person. Like maybe I accidentally found a Bigfooty spot. And, but still trying to be, smart and careful that there could be somebody under there and I could be in danger. So I just stand there and I'm listening and I don't hear any other sound. There's like some birds and stuff, but I can see there's a little bit of a trail going down to underneath the bridge on the side that I'm at where I parked my car. So I'm walking by and I try to like look under there. I can't see anything because it's too far and I don't really want to get closer. So what I do is I take my phone upside down and I lean over the edge of the bridge and I record video on either side underneath the bridge. And I look back on the video, there's nothing down there. Like the water's too high and there's kind of like this clay slick embankment on either side. Like it'd be really tough for somebody to hide under there. So I just keep standing there and listening. And then I go, okay, maybe I'd brought like some snacks and I think rocks, crystals to give as a gift. So I go and grab those out of my car and I start like setting them on the edge of the bridge. There was like little holes in the side pillars. So I kind of like stuffed them in there and set out some snacks. And I just keep standing and listening. Like I wanted to try the whole talking out loud thing, but I was feeling really silly and stupid about it, like embarrassed. So I didn't want to, but then I was just like, okay, I came out all this way, just try it. So I start talking out loud and I get like this thought in my head that I should be like authentic. Like the fact that I'm afraid of the woods, by myself, and that potentially afraid of them, like just be honest about it and be really transparent. And so I started saying that of like essentially that I am aware that I'm fearful of them, but that I also simultaneously have like respect for them, or, that I'm very curious about them and I'm pretty sure that they're real. And it was silent, but my whole body was like buzzing and I felt like there was a presence, like a really strong presence, but I couldn't see anything. And so I chalked that up to like, I'm literally psyching myself up by like talking out loud and thinking something's happening that's not. So I remember trying to collect myself. So I took like this really like deep breath and kind of a sigh. And I'm standing about where I heard the first knock on the bridge. So like between 6 to 10 feet in on the bridge, past the gate, my car's on the other side, and then there's the road. And on the other side of the road is woods that are really thick. And I was getting the sense or the feeling that something was over there already, like when I was talking out loud. But I take a big sigh, breath, and I was like ready to just like get out of there. I felt ridiculous. And so I was just like, you live in a really beautiful place. And, just acknowledging like, at least I found this nature spot. And as soon as I say that, something in the woods on the opposite side of my car where I was, I hear this really like deep, sweet, it was a really sweet sounding vocal, but it was just like, ooh. And I just like completely froze and like had a total physical reaction. And I just started shaking like this. And I was like, okay, thank you. And like instantly, I knew it wasn't a person, and I knew that it wasn't an owl. It wasn't anything else. It sounded like I heard what I intended to go there and like experience. And so I said, if you could please give me some space while I walk back to the car, because I had to walk towards the direction of where the vocal came from. And I get in the car and there's no cell service out there. But I'm like, I was like trying to talk myself down, like, it's okay. It's okay. Like, not, you're not going to get hurt. Everything's fine. Like, that was a sweet thing, like it didn't seem like it was trying to scare me. It seemed like it almost mimicked the sigh that I took before I said that. And I get to the first pullout where I can find like one LTE bar, and I try to call my mom, and I literally I start crying. Like I don't have control over my emotions, and I just start to get really emotional about it. And I was like, Mom, I just heard a vocal. Like it happened. I was attempting to talk to them, and I got it. And yeah, I just remember that completely changing and like confirming my thoughts towards the whole thing. And but I was too afraid to go back out there by myself again because I was like, okay, it worked, but now that I know they're out there, I'm kind of scared. So I had brought my mom back out there at night, and we'd show up like before the sun was down, so it was a little bit light still. And there was this night where we're standing in, at that point, I started focusing more on the woods where the vocalization had come from. And you would hear so much movement, like them walking around, and we would both like be talking out loud to them, and I'd ask for them to like take footsteps, and they would. But you wouldn't see anything. But this one night in particular, my mom and I are standing in front of the car facing the woods, and I like feel that same feeling again where my whole body's kind of buzzing, like when I tried talking to them for the first time. And I look across the road, and there's this massive tree that's like this big, and there's a little bit of opening in the canopy, and the moon is kind of back there somewhere because it's backlighting. Like you see the perfect black shadow of the tree, and then it's lit up back there. But in this moment, I'm not really taking that in. I just am focusing on this tree, and I see the perfect silhouette to the side of the tree of a head, shoulders, and straight down of something really tall. And I didn't I didn't tell my mom what I was seeing. I just said, I was like, can we sit in the car for a second? Like I just was trying to like keep my cool, like composure. And she's like, yeah, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, let's just sit in the car for a second. And so we get back in the car, and I realize, I was like, that was kind of, I did it again where I kind of freak out and I get too nervous. And I wanted to see if what I saw was still there. So I was like, okay, I'm ready to get back out. So we get back out less than 2 minutes later, and I stand in the exact same spot, look at the same tree, and it's completely open and backlit. What I saw wasn't there anymore. And I don't tell that story very much because I think I chalked it up to like my eyes playing tricks on me, but it was the openness and how backlit it was by the moonlight was very obvious and different looking compared to the silhouette I was seeing. I ended up going that summer to the very first Sasquatch Summerfest, and that was where I met Tobe and Priscilla. Well, I didn't really meet Priscilla because she was so busy running it that time, but I remember a couple months later, you set me up to like meet Priscilla out there, start going squatching with her. And yeah, we immediately like hit it off as friends, Priscilla and I, and she started bringing me up to what we call Oak Hole, which was like her dad's research place. But I had a similar thing happen out there where I would kind of stand apart from the group, and I'd get like bold sometimes. And if I asked for them to like take footsteps like I did down at the Siuslaw River, they would do it. And even one time I freaked out and I was like, Priscilla, it's happening. And she came back to the spot where it was happening and met me over there. And they did it one more time where she could hear it too. And we had caught like, I think a really good footprint in the snow. There's all kinds of things that has happened up there, but Eugene was great. And, my family's there, I have friends there. But I couldn't pass up the opportunity to join Tobe up here and, chase after the strangeness together, to be able to live and breathe, all the weirdness that is, constantly keeping you on your toes and excited about life, because it just hints at that there's, more beyond us and all of that. I think sharing that with somebody, the same idea, and we fell in love as best friends foundationally, and then, realized that there was much more to be unraveled between us. And so I followed Tobe up to Washington, and it's been incredible joining in on Olympic Strange Days and being a part of all of this. And of course, I won't bore anybody with the stories that we've had happen up at the cabin where we live, because people can just go and watch our content. But something that we haven't updated people about is our next adventure, which is being engaged and planning to spend the rest of our lives together. It's beautiful. I picked it out myself. And we've had a lot of incredible experiences together already, but I feel like we're just getting started. And thanks for letting me share my encounters growing up and kind of my foundation of strangeness that led me here. And I hope you enjoyed.